Hey everybody, and welcome back. We've got the amazing Tommo Littlewood, one of my favourite POMs, all the way from Dubai. He's just telling me how he's had a bit of a stressful month doing the homeschooling. I'm sure there's lots of parents out there who are just
4 months.
4 months. And he broke a chair the other day. I'm like, oh, thank God you eat sugar, hey? Imagine if you were on some low carb diet, your kids would probably be dead now.
Yeah, maybe.
And he had to move house in between it. I'm like, oh, isn't moving house one of the most stressful things? Thank God for sugar. But today we are discussing PCOS and endometriosis. So, as anyone who's been following me for a while knows that we, work with women and women who've done a lot of excess dieting and low calorie diets, low sugar. And we actually attract a lot of women who have PCOS and endometriosis. And when they come to us, I find that, they've been told to cut sugar out of their diet. They've been told to, eat green vegetables. And a lot of the things that are actually recommended to them are contributing to their condition. And Keith, you'd work with women, hey, too, with endometriosis and PCOS.
Yeah. It's been a common theme for quite some time. I mean, endometriosis and obviously fibroids seem to have a similar starting point, which is an excess of estrogen, perhaps mediated by some aspects of inheritance, or certainly the environment, or certainly inability to regulate blood sugar efficiently, low thyroid function. All of these things seem to come together to combine issues like PCOS, endometriosis, and fibroids. I think there's still this big slant towards PCOS being down to aspects of testosterone or sugar consumption. And I think when there's a certain aspect of excess sugar in the diet without any other nutrients, that might have an effect, but you have to look at all the other underlying factors that bring that to the fore. And certainly low thyroid function, I believe, is one of the primary drivers of PCOS.
And let's dig a bit deeper into, because I think, what are some of the misconceptions around what actually causes PCOS and endometriosis? You sort of touched on it before.
Well, I think if you look at some of the expressions, which sometimes can be like the findings. Well, first of all, findings of cysts in the ovaries doesn't necessarily dictate the PCOS state. It might be combined with other things like expression of other hormones. Like typically, the clinician might look at testosterone. If they're really clever, they'll look at things like aromatase issues and how that's expressed. But I think some of the misconceptions are that PCOS is something that's it's quite normal for particularly teenage girls to experience. With the work that I've done, also my daughter who went through a similar thing, I think one of the big things with PCOS is stress, sometimes undereating, and often the exposure to environmental estrogens, which can have this synergistic effect of growth and creating cystic-like growths on the ovaries themselves. There can be some interactions between the nervous system, and I think the parasympathetic system can stimulate nerve growth within the ovaries themselves. But I think that the common thing is that PCOS needs to be treated with contraceptive pills, which can have a quite a detrimental effect to ovarian physiology and the systemic physiology itself, i.e. how the body responds to being exposed to environmental estrogens or medicinal estrogens. Obviously, there tends to be a switch these days because for a lot of females, they're not prescribed just the bog standard estrogens. They're either given a combo pill of a progestin and an estrogen. And I think it's the suppressive effects that the progestin can have, or if it's a progestin on its own, can still have these kind of very detrimental effects to ovarian function over time. And I think it's where the bad name for progesterone comes from, is the concomitant use of a progestin with it being a normal progesterone, if that makes sense. And it's not, they're two very different things. and the knock-on effects to reproductive physiology over time can be quite problematic. And that's why you'll see a lot of females who sometimes come off the pill and have trouble getting pregnant again. Some rebound quite nicely, and perhaps that's just reflective of their own physiology, and perhaps what they're doing from a dietary perspective, what they've inherited, what their environment's doing. So, but it's not very common that women come off the pill and get pregnant straight away. So getting back to PCOS, I think it's useful to look at PCOS as an interaction of perhaps high estrogen stimulation and low thyroid suppression, which tends to drive this kind of polycystic state. If that makes sense.
And let's talk about, so, you know, women are like, oh, okay, all right, Kitty, that makes sense. But what actually causes that low thyroid function and that high estrogen? Let's talk about, so you talked about stress, and there's lots of different things that can stress the body. So maybe let's start with, you know, diet, because I think, you know, a lot of women that come to us that experience these conditions have been told to eat green vegetables, they eat a lot of nuts, seeds, you know, they don't eat dairy, they'll eat almond milk, you know, and the different nut milks. They'll be eating lower carbs or low carbs, no sugar. So how is that contributing to this?
Well, I think, first of all, I just sidetrack slightly. A lot of the things that, or common strategies that females are given for PCOS is to cut down on sugar consumption, primarily because blood sugar levels can be elevated. But that elevation of blood sugar isn't necessarily to do with sugar consumption. So, for example, a low thyroid state, which can be enhanced by the diet that you just talked about, can be a key driver of why glucose levels are high. Hyperglycemia, or these high glucose states, are often very common when the thyroid is suppressed. Now, you can do two things. You can take away sugar, which will have an effect on lowering glucose levels, but it doesn't mean that the system becomes more efficient. Now, a lot of people will go on this kind of clean, hyper healthy diet, such as lots of raw green vegetables, lots of nuts and seeds, and those fats are problematic in themselves for a number of other reasons, which maybe we'll come back to. But those particular foods, because they tend to be low in energy, they also tend to have thyroid disrupting compounds in them, particularly your kind of brassica vegetables like your broccolis, cauliflowers, radish, sprouts, all these kind of foods. And even to a degree, spinach has a very similar effect as well. So when you're going on these diets that have potentially low energy levels, low energy availability from them, plus they have a double whammy effect, because a lot of females tend to have these kind of raw steamed vegetables which don't have much energy, but those compounds are quite rife. So when you consume them, they have the capacity to disrupt thyroid production. Sometimes that can be mediated by having available iodine, but sometimes, more often than not, it can overwhelm the system. And lots of these other vegetables, like undercooked zucchinis or courgettes, for example, tend to produce high levels of cyanide and create relative levels of cyanosis that are probably quite harmless in a good, robust physiology. But when your energy is low, you don't have enough, you can't regulate glucose efficiently, you can't produce enough thyroid hormone. All of these things lend to the state, the body's state becoming compromised, not being able to produce enough energy. So it's useful to understand. And it's a bit like why some people say, okay, let's cut sugar out so that the blood glucose levels improve. Well, they can improve a little bit because the insulin response isn't being aggravated as much. But that doesn't mean removing the sugar that is the problem. And suppressing sugar, so for example, let's say a lot of people use like the polyunsaturated fatty acids like omega-3s and stuff. In the same reasoning that it lowers cholesterol, it lowers kind of the ability to use sugar as well over time, because it inhibits some of the enzymes that allow you to use glucose efficiently. So it's worth looking at first place. Now, a common theme in young females is undereating. So if you're constantly running off stress hormones, producing cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline, typically to liberate energy from fats. Chronic states of fat oxidation are completely problematic because it perpetuates these compounds that are produced from the metabolism of fats. Now, you would think in a young, normal, healthy physiology that this wouldn't be a problem. And that's why fasting or ketogenic or low carb diets in someone who's relatively healthy and metabolically flexible isn't really a problem. But when you kind of in a physiology, now, if we think about a young person's physiology, we're assuming it to be relatively robust, relatively flexible. But the problem is that more and more these days, children are inheriting stress physiology from their parents. The environment's quite stressful. And this aspect of physiology is passed down to them. I'll often consult with someone and I'm asking about their parents, uncles, aunties, and grandparents' health. And they say, oh, well, my grandmother had low thyroid function. And I think my mother does to a degree as well. Well, those traits are generally passed on to offspring and often poorly detected in chronic states of stress. So if you're getting a young girl who's been exposed to whatever societal messages about weight gain or weight loss, whatever it might be, who's starting to eat in a dysregulated manner, the production of cortisol, adrenaline can lower thyroid function so that it's really poorly detected. So one of the first things that she's going to go to perhaps with a doctor, is going to check her blood sugar levels. The blood sugar levels are going to be high, perhaps estrogen, because it's a very developmental phase. Estrogen's being shot through the roof with the onset of puberty and beyond. Young girls are exposed to other environmental sources of estrogen. We know the air has a very estrogenic effect. We know that makeups will have an estrogenic effect, which young girls, they're getting into that phase where they're able to go and slap loads of makeup on. All of these things can have an effect. And then there might be cleaning products within the house that also will have an environmental effect that stimulates estrogen or estrogen-like compounds. So this capacity to have dysregulated reproductive physiology, i.e. high estrogen levels, compromised thyroid function, compromised blood sugar regulation, can be poorly detected within that framework because someone's just going to look at blood glucose levels. They're looking at perhaps an ultrasound and looking at a presence of cystic ovaries, looking at perhaps at levels of testosterone and other markers. But sometimes the blood tests aren't going to be particularly useful for picking up what's really, really going on. And as I said, these low thyroid states can be inherited and passed on and poorly detected, and even more poorly detected when there's chronic underlying stressors. And we know that teenage years can be really, really stressful for a lot of females. And so, the notion to conform to perhaps dieting or undereating is something that's going to suppress this physiology. And I think PCOS is really an expression of low thyroid function, the ability to estrogen to create these cystic responses. And that's why I think when they go onto these diets that are
do you know
really
what?
Healthy,
Yeah,
sorry.
you know what though? Like, even I think, just to jump in there, is that even if they're not dieting, if they're just eating what they believe is healthy, because I remember, what I perceived was a healthy diet was, I'd have almond milk lattes and nut milks, and I'd be eating relatively low carb and greens, and because even if I was eating enough calories, I was eating all of these foods that I just thought were healthy, but were all, like, say, contributing to that low thyroid function and having, like the goitrogens in the green vegetables. And it's just, I think, like, what's considered healthy is if they're not dieting, they're eating all of these foods that are not helping them.
But you've hit the nail on the head. It tends to be still a low energy state, right? And the low carb diet will be a low energy state. Usually, it's rare that young females will eat lots and lots of fat. It'll always be a low carb, so it'll be lots of salads or a cereal or a small sandwich or something like that, or grab maybe the odd bag of crisps or something like that is something that my eldest seems to have done previously, and it's that kind of diet that lends to the problem. Low energy state, inability to detoxify high levels of estrogens, And remember, estrogen, well, detoxification as a whole it's the liver primary function, along with the kidneys and the skin and the lungs. It's energy dependent, and it's also kind of vitamin dependent. So if you're not getting adequate vitamins like B vitamins like B1 and B2, these are the things that can compromise the ability to excrete estrogen out of the body. So if you're in a low energy state, you can't metabolize estrogen efficiently. Your thyroid is suppressed. You don't have enough energy to function anyway. Perhaps you even get a bit constipated, and there's another way of kind of blocking you up and not being able to excrete all of the hormones and metabolites and other things that don't need to be in the body. This can lend itself to why that kind of diet, the raw green healthy diet, low energy, low calorie, can be a problem in mediating the problem. And this is why PCOS, just like much of the other diseases that we tend to see, like low thyroid function, are on the rise. And there's this synergy between high estrogen, low thyroid, and sometimes that testing, if you're testing it by the blood, it's a really, really poor way of making a diagnosis, I believe.
I think too, you know, like, I mean, we attract a lot of older women into our program, like in their 30s. I'm not saying being in 30s old, but like typically we don't get a lot of women in their 20s, because I think you can do a lot of dumb shit to your body then, and you don't notice the effects so much until you get older. But, you know, like a lot of these women, you know, there's women in their 50s with PCOS, and, you know, no one comes into our program eating liver, you know, and not many women know that their body makes, you know, its protective steroid hormones out of vitamin A, T3 and cholesterol, and liver's so high in vitamin A, and it's just one thing that we recommend all of our clients either eat the liver or eat the liver capsules. And it's just incredible, you know, I've seen women in their 50s who've got PCOS, and after a year of, you know, making the recommended dietary changes, no longer have PCOS. You know, like it's quite incredible.
Well, I think with the vitamin A as well, because there's a very positive effect with one of the thyroid hormone carriers called transthyretin, is that high levels of kind of polyunsaturated fats and pollution combined to this thyroid carrier, but it's also a vitamin A carrier as well. So what tends to happen is that both vitamin A and thyroid, particularly T4, can be kicked off this thyroid carrier. So when you start to enhance vitamin A with this carrier, and perhaps you can increase the availability of thyroid hormone by having enough energy available, is that this thyroid carrier can be much improved. And so if you're getting more thyroid and vitamin A to tissues, remember both thyroid and vitamin A, retinol in particular, are very organizational compounds. They drive how growth should be occurring. So they're responsible for organization and maintaining the tissue in its best working order. So I've seen very similar things with clients coming to me with PCOS, and usually a combination of things like liver, progesterone, having enough calories in. I've seen a client come to me and get pregnant after 4 weeks because she was on a low carb diet, and that low carb diet will lend itself to a low progesterone state anyway, because you're constantly shuttling the glucocorticoids, cortisol and glucose to the same place that progesterone should go to. And plus that's going to suppress, you know, more organization of thyroid as well as progesterone anyway. So having enough energy available is the thing that drives most organized, most coherent, most optimal tissue responses. So it doesn't come as any surprise that you see that with your clients.
Yeah, it's still, you know, even though I obviously know that it'll work, it still blows my mind, you know, the effectiveness of some very simple, you know, changes done consistently over time. So maybe to finish off, you know, if a woman's listening to this and she does suffer from endometriosis or PCOS, let's talk about some, you know, few simple things that they can change in their diet to help improve their condition. I think one we've already mentioned, you know, eat if you can, get some fresh liver. If not, you know, get the desiccated liver tablets. We've both been taking them now, the Saturée liver tablets. Carrot salad, daily carrot salad, is a good, easy, cheap thing that you can do every day.
Going to toilet every day is very important for managing estrogen levels. There's no doubt about that. The more constipated you get, you can't pass out these metabolites, as I suggested earlier on, in particular estrogens. So if you're hanging around for 2 or 3 days in the bowel, a lot of these compounds that should be being passed out are getting reabsorbed via the colon by something called, I don't remember the name, re-enterohepatic circulation. So it goes back into the bloodstream, back up to the liver to be remetabolized and to be passed out another way, perhaps by the urine, perhaps by a sweat, but various mechanisms that are involved in detoxification. So going to toilet every day is a great way of managing estrogen levels. You talk about carrot salad, obviously use bamboo shoots or mushrooms, particularly good way.
That's good too.
Yeah, cascara. I mean, that's one of my go-tos with clients who are having a hard time. I think magnesium sulfate does a really good job as well.
We've talked about that, yeah.
I think magnesium sulfate and cascara. I think any of those things are useful. Just if most people who even are overtly hypothyroid, which lend themselves to these high estrogen traits, typically, if you get the food right, you can still get really good bowel function unless they really, really are in dire need of thyroid hormone. And bowel motility is really kind of diminished because the muscles and the function of the digestive system is just as energy needy and thyroid needy as the rest of the body. So if you're someone who's really not responding to the foods, then you probably need to look at thyroid for managing bowel and going to the toilet, but also effectively lowering the capacity of estrogen to dysregulate your whole system. And that's why endometriosis, uterine fibroids, polyps, PCOS, that's why they're able to exert their negative effect, is because estrogen is rife and organizational qualities of, say, progesterone, vitamin A and thyroid are much diminished.
And obviously getting enough energy in and carbohydrates and sugars. So just, I mean, oh God, I don't think any woman should be eating under 2,000 calories a day, and you shouldn't be, cutting out. A lot of women, myself included, I never ate fruit and I didn't drink juice, and I didn't eat any of the stuff that I eat now. So I think that's really important. Don't be scared of carbs and sugar and calories. Dairy, calcium is important too. I've seen a lot of women improve when we started to track their calcium levels and increase them.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you've kind of been prone to eating lots of cereals and meats or beans and legumes on their own, you get the high phosphate to calcium ratios, which tends to play havoc with what's going on with calcium anyway. So if a lot of people say, oh, you can get more calcium from broccoli or spinach, and it's like, it's not that bioavailable. It has to be really, really well cooked. So having enough calcium in the diet helps to prevent the production of parathyroid hormone, which will take calcium from the bones. So sometimes when you see people with high calcium levels taken from the blood, this can be because there's actually low calcium availability. So the body will kind of cleverly, if it's not that clever, but it will take calcium out of the bones. And sometimes it can flood into unwanted areas like soft tissues. So, hypertension or high blood pressure can be a product of calcium infiltrating the soft tissues around the arteries and makes them much less flexible. And this is why having enough calcium in the diet, particularly from dairy foods, is really, really useful. And it's very, very rare I've found that someone really, truly has a problem with dairy. And it is a product of perhaps low vitamin C, low magnesium, low thyroid function, intestinal irritants. Dairy products coming with intestinal irritants, you find even things like cheeses and milks coming with carrageenans or gums in them, or your crappy ice creams coming with gums. And these are potent intestinal irritants. So the calcium-rich foods like dairy and milk and whatever it is, cheeses, can be a product of what's actually in those products rather than the dairy themselves. So if you're taking some dairy that has an intestinal irritant and your digestive system's already irritated, the two coming together is a double whammy for blaming dairy products as a source of irritation. And even other things like high tryptophan ratio from milk can cause some people to have problems because perhaps there's a low levels of the other amino acids like glycine. So it's a very valid point. Again, keeping adequate calcium around so it doesn't get into other tissues and cause excitable tissues, and that's the same for most tissues in the body.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much Keith, I love doing these things because I like you too, but I always learn new things when we talk. So if you're a woman and you do suffer from endometriosis or PCOS and you've been doing the typical healthy diet of, the green vegetables and the low carb, probably time to switch your thinking. And I know that a lot of what we talk about goes against mainstream nutrition advice. But, I've seen women follow mainstream nutrition advice for years and years and years, and they come into our program and, follow the guidelines. And they, like I said, within a year, no more PCOS, no more cysts on their ovaries. It's actually, again, like I still find it really incredible just what food can do for the body. So and I hope you found that really helpful. And if you have any questions at all, you can always just comment below and we'll answer them. And thanks again, Keith. And I'll see you next time. Bye.
Perfect. Okay.
Bye.
See you soon. Bye.